Hello everyone, welcome to your lecture on post-feminist media culture and its role in the constructions of empowerment and violence against women. This lecture is a part of your paper on gender, media and society. This lecture will help you to understand the concept of post-feminism and how it influences the construction of women's empowerment. It will also show how post-feminist media culture catalyzes incidences of crime against women. Since its inception, feminists have fought for equal rights of women, work and politics, raised their voices against men's control of women's sexual and reproductive lives and women's self-identity, self-respect and self-esteem through the institution of patriarchy, exploitation of unpaid domestic work performed by women at home by capitalist institutions, and also engaged with other forms of social stratifications such as caste, ethnicity, sexual preferences, physical abilities, etc. Feminist media theory helps to understand the material and symbolic structures as well as our everyday experiences in a comprehensive way by viewing media from the vantage point of gender. Although media plays a very crucial role in making sense of our everyday lives and is deeply enmeshed in cultural practices, mainstream scholars working on media did not accord any importance to the gender questions, completely disregarded the production and reproduction of stereotypical representations of women in media because they felt such stereotypes were given and normal. Even those critical communication scholars who engaged with gender questions did so under the influence of hegemonic masculine ideologies. This was the prevailing scenario in media theory until mid-1970s. Gradually, the awareness about gender issues came to attract greater intellectual and scholastic focus. In the 1980s and 1990s, the upsurge of an anti-feminist approach which signifies a new form of feminist sensibilities that is premised on the argument that the need for feminism has come to an end. Lifestyle consumption, commodification, self-fashioning, etc. are the hallmarks of this approach, frequently termed as post-feminist approach. This era of post-feminism signified a celebration of femininity, but the manner in which it envisioned empowerment actually ruled out the existence of poverty, violence, social marginalization, etc. as social realities of everyday life. Post-feminist popular culture. Post-feminism is one of the most contentious concepts in the area of feminist cultural analysis. The thrust of post-feminist debates revolve around transformations in feminist ideology itself as well as in media culture. According to Gill, there are three dominant positions which try to explain post-feminism: epistemological or political position in the wake of feminism's encounter with difference, and historical shift with feminism or a backlash against feminism. Gill further observes that post-feminism can be best understood as a sensibility that characterizes increasing numbers of films, television shows, adverts and other media products. Given the fact that there is a lack of consensus as to what constitutes post-feminism, it becomes extremely difficult to define the essential features. Gill identifies some features which define post-feminist sensibilities. Femininity as a bodily property, a shift from objectification to subjectification, an emphasis upon self-surveillance, monitoring and discipline, a focus upon individualism, choice and empowerment, the dominance of a makeover paradigm, a resurgence in ideas of natural sexual difference, a marked sexualization of culture, and an emphasis upon consumerism and commodification of difference. Obsession with the body is endemic in post-feminist media culture. Femininity comes to be defined in terms of bodily property rather than in terms of socio-cultural or biological aspects. Women's identity is essentialized not around being a mother or caregiver, but as the owner of a body, which is the primary source of feminine power that needs to be constantly monitored, disciplined, and remodeled. Women's bodies are both the celebrities and the common women are relentlessly devaluated and dissected across all genres of media. According to Gill, in post-feminist discourse, female body is also construed as reflecting her personal life. Thus, the consumption of extra calories and becoming fat indicates psychological turmoil in Bridget Jones, for example. It is perhaps obvious that overwhelming focus on the nitty-gritty of women's bodies would produce a pervasive sexualization of contemporary culture, which is signified through two pathways. First, all forms of media are marked by a proliferation of discourses about sex and sexuality, which has been referred to as striptease culture by McNair. Second, a banal representation of girls and women, and to a much lesser extent men, as erotic bodies in public spaces. The construction of sexual images vary on the basis of gender in the popular magazines, while in the men's magazines, discourses on sexual practices are constructed around being youthful and pleasure-seeking. In the women's magazine, it is constructed as something requiring constant attention, discipline, self-surveillance, and emotional labor. Depiction of women as sexual desires have typically dominated the content of all forms of media since a long time now. However, what distinguishes the present forms from the earlier ones is that while previously women were represented as passive, mute objects of an assumed male gaze, present-day images construct them as active, desiring sexual subjects who choose to present themselves in a seemingly objectified manner because it suits their liberated interests to do so. This shift is an intrinsic and essential feature of post-feminist sensibility, and as later discussion we would show, rigorously adopted by all forms of media. It not only renders sexual knowledge and sexual practice as central, but also signifies a shift in the operation of power dynamics in the society. A shift from an external, male-judging gaze to a self-policing, narcissistic gaze. Needless to mention that such representations entail massive increase in sexual violence committed against women, a point which would be discussed later in this chapter. It is clear by now that the post-feminist discourses invoke the notions of being and pleasing oneself as the essential features of building identities of the women. These notions are intricately interwoven into the concept of empowerment, which also calls for taking charge of one's own life. However, While empowerment in the feminist discourse is a collective struggle to move from a condition of powerlessness to that of wielding power in personal lives. In the post-feminist discourses, empowerment is framed as a personal agenda completely disregarding the famous outcry, "personal is political." It is obvious that such constructions are completely distilled of the influences of culture and political power struggle. As put by Gill, the notion that all our practices are freely chosen is central to post-feminist discourses, which present women as autonomous agents, no longer constrained by any inequalities or power imbalances whatsoever. Ages of feminist movement against essentializing sexual differences as central to the construction of gender identities as well as social inequalities have been completely dispensed by the post-feminist discourses. In fact, the latter has marked a resurgence of ideas of natural sexual differences across all media, from newspapers to advertising to talk shows and popular fiction. Informed by post-feminist sensibilities, all forms of media emphasize on the fact that men and women are intrinsically different and that such differences must be acknowledged rather than denied. According to this discourse, feminism fell short of adequately addressing the battle between the sexes because it completely disregarded the natural sexual differences between men and women and only focused on ideological constructions. The book written by John Gray, Men Are From Mars and Women Are For Venus, or Deborah Tannen's You Just Don't Understand Men and Women in Conversation, are important texts that explicitly communicated this post-feminist discourse. According to Gill, a larger role for the popular media then is translating or mediating men's and women's communication, customs and funny ways to each other in a manner that still systematically privileges male power. She further observes that sexual difference discourses also serve to re-eroticize power relations between men and women. At one level, this simply means that differences is constructed on the basis of sex. At another, discourses of natural gender difference can be used to freeze in place existing inequalities by representing them as inevitable and, if read correctly, as pleasurable. Today's media, be it audio or visual or print or digital, is marketed by an explicit incorporation of feminist ideologies within itself. This is, feminist discourses are no longer external critical voices existing outside media but expressed within it. However, media has not yet been able to adopt feminist perspectives unproblematically. It only offers contradictory but nevertheless patterned constructions that feminist ideas are inserted into all forms of media content in a revised and depoliticized manner. Post-feminist discourses consider feminism and feminists as cruel, punitive and insensitive to women's real desires. In simpler words, feminist ideologies do not allow women to enjoy pleasures of being women, say for example seeking pleasures from self-adornment, and thus such ideologies must be dispensed with, signifying empowerment through post-feminist media culture. As mentioned earlier, the post-feminist ideologies have ushered in new forms of sensibilities in popular culture, especially advertising media. The latter have enthusiastically assimilated the feminist criticisms directed at sexist content in the advertisements and have apparently attempted to incorporate progressive changes to this end. However, Lazar observes that social advertising of this kind is rarely genuinely progressive. According to Goldman, the political goals, priorities, and values are actually diluted from feminist ideologies by the advertisers, and a popular commodity feminism, or as McRobbie put it, commercial femininities, is put into practice. Lazar maintains that such popular post-feminism is a commercially strategic appropriation of certain post-feminist or third-wave currents, as espoused, for instance, by Naomi Wolf and, to some extent, Judith Butler. The feminists in general and the second-wave feminists in particular have always criticized the beauty industry as oppressive for women because it coaxes women to emulate impossible beauty standards such as thin bodies, fair skin, etc., which sometimes have negative health consequences upon them. The beauty industry today continues to promulgate similar agenda only in a different form which conforms to the post-feminist sensibilities. In simpler words, the post-feminists claim that beauty practices enable the women to derive pleasure for themselves from adorning their own bodies. The post-feminists thus see beauty practices as potentially subversive spaces against patriarchal codes of femininity which ordain women as hapless and worthless individuals, relentlessly endeavoring for man's approval for self-worth through beautification of the self. Lazar terms this as invocation of power femininity, which, according to her, is implicated in different ways. By depicting the pursuit of beauty, knowledge about beauty products as essentially empowering, giving away considerable agentive and sexual power. The advertisements also claim that an empowered woman is one who has perfect knowledge about the beauty products. The concept of power femininity is also enunciated through women's exercise of self-determination and agency, which constitute an important goal for feminists and post-feminists alike, albeit envisaged differently. Feminists construe empowerment as a collective struggle for taking charge of their own lives and exercising life choices. On the other hand, the post-feminists view empowerment as an individualistic project undertaken by women through the pursuit of beauty and sexual autonomy. Thus, women's agency is tied to consumerism and is signified through self-beautification, such as fighting against dull complexion, marks and wrinkles, hair fall, the aging process, etc. As mentioned earlier, post-feminist sensibilities have led to a depiction of women as sexually autonomous, active, and desiring subjects rather than as passive victims in the face of male aggressors. According to Lazar, related to the exercise of agency is heteronormative feminine sexuality displayed as sexual power. This shift in sexualized representation of women in advertisements appear to signify a change in the viewing of sexual encounters as exploitative to being potentially empowering. It thus appears to echo the claim made by Naomi Wolf, who contends that power feminism is unapologetically sexual and that What every woman does with her body and in her bed is her own business. Post-feminist sensibilities and the construction of crime against women. According to the National Crime Records Bureau, incidences of sexual harassment and rape are increasing steadily in India, which reflects the normalization of a rape culture whereby sexual violence gets accepted as a commonplace fact of life. The role played by the political, administrative and judicial machineries of the country in pacifying, sometimes condoning, such heinous crimes further testifies to the generic social acceptance of rape culture in India. What role do the media play in disseminating rape myths? In order to answer this question, we need to look into firstly, how crimes against women gets reported, and secondly, how gendered roles and behavior such as stalking, sexualized images, etc. are projected through advertisements, movies and other such popular media platforms. Reporting of crimes. Despite the fact that several public policies, legal measures have been adopted by the state to address violence against women, such incidents continue unabated. This is because of the unmoved attitude of the society in terms of perceptions about gender roles and stereotypes. A study on masculinity, intimate partner violence and son preference in India, conducted in Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Odisha, Punjab and Haryana, and carried out by the International Center for Research on Women and the UNFPA, observed that about 60% of the male respondents reportedly accepted that they committed violence against their wife or partner. Based on interviews with 9,205 men, this study further observed that the average Indian man is convinced that masculinity is about acting tough, freely exercising his privilege to lay down the rules in personal relationships and above all, controlling women. Media is a primary cultural site perpetuating these myths. Many scholars have pointed out that crime reporting constitutes the bulk of news nowadays and that violent and sexual crimes are overreported. Sensationalizing the crime incidents, which in turn manipulate public perceptions to sell copies, is a rampant phenomena. As Hughes points out, the use of stereotypes, gender-biased prejudices, etc. participate in the production of such news. According to Spector and Kitsus, often what people believe and think about a social problem has been largely constructed through claim making in the media. When media report rape incidents, for instance, they do so in allusion to the society's cultural, political and moral ethos. As put by McEvoy, the construction, articulation, reassurance and ultimately reassertion of a sense of public morality of what is moral and immoral, right and wrong, good and bad. The crime reports on various forms of media evokes massive public contemplation and debates about the appropriateness of the woman in question and the moral integrity of her family. Further, Wilcox observed that media tend to underreport cases of domestic violence while overreporting rape cases in the public spaces. Focus on victims as compared to the neglect of perpetrators of violence and absence of a gendered perspective. Another common typecasting perpetuated by media portrayals also testifies the attitude expressed by the self-proclaimed forerunners of the society at large, is that women victims of violent crimes, especially sexual crimes, ask for it by the way they dress or how much alcohol they may consume. Thus, media reports on crime go a large way in shaping people's perception about cultural and gender-based stereotypes. Such public stereotypes serve to filter what is processed when the media report crime stories and indirectly feed back to the media organizations' values regarding what the public wants. Production and reproduction of gendered images. Gendered images and stereotypes portrayed in the media arise out of gender stereotypes in the society and interact significantly shape the construction of crime and victimization. One of the major themes romanticized in movies, soaps, commercials is that of stalking. Good women keep off the public spaces, do not freely mingle with men, and never overtly express their romantic feelings towards the latter, no matter how strongly they feel for their respective men. Such naive representation of women serves to justify their getting stalked and vigorously persuaded to submit to the stalkers. A dangerous message communicated through such portrayals is that for women, no means yes, that a woman who says no would eventually submit after much cajoling and coaxing. It is thus obvious that stalking is projected as a sweet precursor to love relationships with little recognition that it can actually elicit violent crimes against women in their everyday lives. As observed by D. Becker, romance narratives commonly entail romantic idealizations and adventurous endeavors overcoming great odds and involving greater personal sacrifice, as the one obsessed with another invests in a campaign of pursuit despite the rejections by the object of affection. Moreover, the helpless submission of women to their male stalkers as depicted in such media content indicates that women are only reactive rather than proactive in courtship, and also that they are not capable of taking care of themselves and constantly need to be protected. Rape of a woman is a recurrent theme in mainstream as well as regional movies in India. According to Hima Bandhu et al., the familiar portrayal of rape and sexual assault of women in cinema, however tacit, is disturbing in its lack of censorship versus censorship of acts like kissing, for example, and its conflicting pervasiveness in a mainstream form of entertainment. Another popular genre on Indian television, the daily soaps based on internal family politics plotted and executed by women, significantly contribute towards upholding as well as reproducing other forms of gender-based violence within households. Notwithstanding the form of media, two broad images of women get implicated: those of good woman who is naive, docile, complained, submits easily to male dominance, victimized frequently, devoted unequivocally to become the ideal wife or daughter, and loyal wives and helpmates daughter and wife, while the second image pertains to that of the bad woman who is overt and defiant. Media frequently typecast the relationships between men and women by depicting women as dependent on man, as subservient to men's authoritarian position both at the household and community level, as the primary caregivers, while men are shown as breadwinners. In case of rare depictions of working women, their career typically receive little or no attention, or they are depicted as super women who cook, clean and care with as much rigor as they pursue their careers. Perhaps the most harmful aspect that catalyzes serious crimes against women in real lives are the depiction of women as sex objects. As noted earlier, the manner in which sexualized images of women are being depicted now has undergone palpable changes due to post-feminist sensibilities. However, the fact that women are not shown as passive sex objects, rather as proactively seeking sexual encounters to satiate their desires, does not justify dispensing with the fact that such depictions encourage men to view women as objects of sexual desire who need to be tamed and controlled through sexual aggression. According to Wood, the music videos shown on MTV play a significant role in constructing women as provocative sex objects. Several films also show men to be coercing women into sexual activities and physically abusing them. All such portrayals are embedded in the cultural typecasting of men as aggressors and women as passive victims. Repeated production and reproduction of such images in all forms of media lead to normalizing violence against women. Several scholars have shown that exposure to sexual violence through media is linked to a greater tolerance or even approval of violence. Summing up this lecture, we learned that post-feminist media culture has resulted in a radical shift in the way of everyday life experiences of the women are viewed. Women are now relentlessly urged by the popular media to seek self-gratification through self-adornment and proactive sexual discourses. The resultant proliferation of sexualized images of women in a society which is otherwise tolerant towards rape culture have in turn catalyzed incidences of violence committed against women. Biased media reportings about rape cases and those of violent crime to sell copies also contribute towards this increase. Thus, media need to play a more sensible role. Hope you have enjoyed the lecture. For more details, please read the e-text of this lecture properly and attempt the questions in the end. Thank you.